Hey book nerds, I'm Travis and this is Travis Reads Books. This is my first post for ShakeTube 2017. And ShakeTube sounds kind of like an exercise accessory, but it's actually a group of booktubers getting together and discussing Shakespeare in weekly videos every Friday. This week we're discussing Richard III, which is one of my favorite Shakespeare plays and also one of my first exposures to Shakespeare. When I was still quite young, I remember renting the VHS copy of Richard III starring Ian McKellen. And I still vividly remember the iconic scene where the tank comes crashing through the wall at the beginning. I should point out that although normally I make sure all my videos are spoiler-free, I kind of feel like the statute of limitations on Shakespeare spoilers has probably gone by, so I'm going to be freely talking about the play without worrying about spoiling anything. So if you haven't read it yet and want to be surprised by the ending, you've been warned. So Richard III is the story of Richard, who is the brother of the king. The story picks up right after a successful campaign, but Richard is a hunchback. He's physically deformed, and he feels the need to make up for that by being the king himself someday. It's really all he cares about, and his brother is quite sick. So the play is basically about Richard killing his way to the crown by taking out anyone who has a claim to it. The funny thing about it is Richard III is named Lord Protector by his brother. So he would in fact have taken over and ruled for many years after his brother died. But I don't think for Richard that it was about ruling or even having power. It was about status. It was about being named king. It was about people calling him Your Majesty. He was just in such a psychological hole from his own physical handicaps that he couldn't get past it. And he really felt that the only way he could make up for it, and make up for it to whom, I don't know, just himself, I guess. The only way he could make up for it is by being king, and so he does whatever it takes. And I mean, he just kills everybody. His family, the Queen's family, random enemies, friends. By the end of the movie, where his paranoia has really just gotten a hold of him completely, he's just killing anyone. Even the people who have been loyal to him for the entire play. What I enjoy the most about Richard III is the way it portrays Richard, though, because he's just a horrible person. He just does such vile things. I mean, killing women and children. He tricks the widow of a man he killed into marrying him, and then he just kills her anyway. He's up there with the worst of Shakespeare's villains. But unlike someone like Iago, he's not evil for evil's sake. He's just committed to one goal, and he's working so insanely hard towards this one goal. In a way, you're kind of rooting for him. When he finally becomes king, you're kind of glad for the guy. I mean, he puts so much into it. I mean, he kind of deserves it. I mean, you don't really feel that way, but you kind of feel that way. And I think he is kind of a sympathetic character for all the bad stuff he does. Maybe just because of his physical limitations and the way you can imagine he's been treated his whole life. But I think he has a lot of depth, and he's definitely one of my favorite Shakespeare characters. Probably in my top 3, I would say. If I have one criticism of Richard III, it's that the hero character, Richmond, is basically non-existent. He kind of just shows up at the end and saves the day. And we don't get to know him, or he's not really a character. He's more just mentioned most of the time. And I understand why. He's sort of supposed to be the opposite of Richard. He's supposed to be virtuous in every way, and so if we got to know the character, then we'd get to know his faults. And so the idea to display him as basically perfect, the only way to do that is to not display him at all and only have people talk about him and how virtuous he is and all the good things he's going to do. And so he is the antithesis of Richard, but I think it would be more interesting, or would have been more interesting, to have a character who was maybe not the complete antithesis of Richard, but who had faults of their own. I think having two compelling characters on each side of the conflict would have really made for some fantastic scenes, as opposed to solely focusing on the villain of the play. That's a small nitpick, because I really do love the character of Richard III and the play overall. Well, that was my thoughts on Richard III, this week's ShakeTube play. Next Friday, I'm sure I'll be back with next week's play. Thanks for watching. Love and respect. See you next time.